Another thing we're going to look at is the actual glass within these different scopes. Many people, they heard the terms like ED glass. You know, they'll see it advertised for different scopes, or this one uses HD glass. And a lot of folks think that's talking about high definition. You think your 1080, high definition television you can get there. You got all them pixels. That's not what we're talking about with HD. And we're going to explain the difference between achromatic lenses, chromatic lenses, and apochromatic lenses. And we're talking about how the light goes through the lenses and exactly what's going on there, so that you can appreciate what some of these different lenses are accomplishing. We're also going to discuss briefly glass origin and different optics manufacturers. Where do these lenses come from? Are American scope companies, do they actually make their own glass? A lot of guys like to, they'll find certain scopes and they'll say, oh, that doesn't have near as good a glass as this one because that's not American. Well, we're going to actually take a little bit of a look at this. We're not going to get too much in depth, but you might be a little bit surprised of some of the origins of a lot of these different types of glass from these different companies. So we're going to talk about glass outsourcing, quality control, and apply it to the different brand names. We're going to talk about like Leopold, Nikon, USO, all the different brand names. We're going to really briefly mention reticles again and the quality of that, and the overall construction quality, like the adjustment and turret tracking reliability, again, is huge. It has a lot to do with machining and assembly. So just the overall construction quality of the scope, everything has to be perfectly put together in order for it to work properly. Like we said in the video before this one, we've been concentrating on optical sight parameters in terms of features. And as we've seen, for our purposes, your scope is going to have the exact right features in order for it to be even somewhat effective. And the other half of it, obviously, is that if it's going to have those features are going to have to actually work for you. So that's where the quality comes in. Just having the feature alone is not enough. The feature has to work. So we're going to definitely look at that. And that has to do with a lot with how the scope is put together. The assembly process is huge, and you can make some judgments based on where it was assembled too, because there are overall differences in workmanship quality when you go to different regions where some of these things are assembled. And we'll just briefly talk about that. And then we're going to talk about ruggedness of the different optics. We're going to look at different brands, and we're going to make judgments on ruggedness based on past experiences and also based upon like field tests and military selection, and just features, and which ones are more prone to be more rugged and which ones are not as rugged. And after we're done discussing our glass types, we can look at these different brands and discuss optical clarity between the brands and different things like this. So let's get started here. Let me look at my little sheet here. Okay, we got a potential long-range optical sights compared. Now, on this graph here, you're going to notice that we got on the left-hand column going down, we got different makes, and these are brand names here, and I got them in alphabetical order. Now, there's a bazillion different rifle scopes out there that would probably be marketed as long-range tactical scopes. What I tried to do here is I just tried to consolidate some of the real popular brand names that a lot of people ask about and are curious about, and which you'll find in most stores. And I've kind of, for the model, I've tried to select like the representative model of each one of these different brands that would be appropriate for application. So, like for example, on the Burris scope, I chose the Extreme Tactical because that's kind of their scope that they're marketing for our purposes. So I'm not going to go choose their turkey hunting scope or something like that, right? So I try to choose the best optic or the most typical representation of their long-range precision rifle optic here. And, of course, these different conclusions we're going to draw, we're not trying to basically slam any brand names because this is going to be very dependent also on the model. As I'm sure most of you are aware, different brands have different lines of models, you know, and you can find some real expensive scopes. Like, for example, Leopold makes all different price ranges and stuff like that. You can buy scopes for $170 all the way up to a couple thousand, when we're talking about Leopold. So it's going to depend a lot on the different model number too, So these aren't carved in stone by any means, but this is just a basic matrix we're going to construct to try to help us kind of sort through all the confusing deals. And this is just a comparison deal. This is not trying to actually quantify any quality values, but it's just comparative, okay? Now, as you'll see, we'll have these different scopes and models here on the left, and on the different columns are labeled. We got turret tracking. That's our primary criteria like we talked about before. And we have assigned letter grades, kind of like you'd get if you went to school. And F would be like a failing grade. A would be really good. B is pretty good. C is going to work fine. That's a passing grade. D is oh man, you need improvement. And F is a bad deal. So, and again, this is not set in stone, but it's just we're getting a basic idea. Now, I'm grading pretty tough on these optics. For our extreme range applications, minor differences matter a lot, especially in the quality of certain features. So just because I didn't give a scope a rating of A, for example, in a certain category, doesn't mean it's not good. It just means that it's not the absolute best. So the ones with a grade of A represent the very, very best. A grade of a B is still very good, but it's not the top of the line. So let's briefly introduce you to these different columns real quick, and then we'll go back and kind of go through each one. The first one, as we said before, was the reliable turret tracking. This is the big one. If you only could look at one column, this is the one you want to pay attention to. Reliable tracking. Your scope has to have that. If it doesn't have that, then you don't want it. That's the main criteria. It's not glass clarity. But most of these scopes are going to have just fine clarity for all practical purposes. There are differences in clarity, but that's not how we're grading these. Because if you think about it, who cares how clearly you can see if when you dial in the optic, it's going to not hit where you're pointing. So the turret tracking is the big deal. The next column is internal build quality. And this is talking about the interior parts of the scope, just how well things are put together, what materials they may have used, and how well everything meshes together and operates. These long-range tactical scopes are very, very precise instruments. And everything needs to click right and dial in right, and your alignment has to be absolutely perfect. You kind of want this to be put together like a well-made Swiss watch or something. So that's with any precise instrument, but particularly in these optics, and that's represented here by these internal build quality column. Optical clarity is the next one we have on the list. Although it's not the most important thing, it's still pretty important. You do want to be able to see your target more clearly, especially if you plan on having an optic with high magnification. As we talked about before, a lot of guys think that a high magnification scope is kind of the ticket, but then they get the scope and they dial it up to the maximum power setting, and they'll notice it's actually seems more blurry than it was on the low power setting, and that's because you're zooming in on optical imperfections in the glass. So if you want high magnification capability in your scope, like over 10 power, you're definitely going to have to pay attention to optical clarity. And unless you're and we'll talk about the lenses here in a minute, but unless you're planning on getting some pretty premium lenses, you don't want to mess around with high magnification because it's not going to help you very much. The next column is overall ruggedness. That's going to have a lot to do with the materials of construction again, and also it's going to be a combination of that and the features that are in the scope and the complexity of the scope. So that's kind of a more, this is all more dynamic than we can just list in the chart. The next column is general quality score, and that's going to kind of take an overall average of the grade of the overall quality. And the other column you might be seeing there, that's the features score, and I'll show you probably in the next video. We're going to run through practicing actually selecting scopes from this list, and we're going to try to show you how we got that feature score. But that's the different features. If the scope actually has the features in the first place, that was the score there. So let's just work our way down the line and look at these different brands and models. and try to get an idea of the quality that these different models are going to have. I was looking for the Barska scope that a lot of people would probably try to use, and I found the tactical rifle scope. It's called just the Barska Tactical, and this is a 1-inch tube, and it's a 3 to 12 variable, mil-dot reticle, first focal plane, and it has the 1/4 inch adjustments for windage and elevation. We gave this a feature score of a C, because that's not really a bad combination of features. It didn't have a perfect score because, the 1-inch tube, that's kind of a check mark against it there. That you're going to want a larger tube for long-range applications. You're going to want a bigger range of elevation adjustment in there. Also, one thing we considered here, that the magnification was fine because it was in the first focal plane, so that is a desirable feature. If you have a variable power magnification, you do have to have a first focal plane. So that checked out okay. We didn't have any demerits there. Mil-dot reticle's good, but we notice here minutes of angle, okay? So our units of measurement on our elevation and windage adjustment are in minutes of angle, and our reticle is a mil-dot. So we have milliradians as one system of angular measurement in our reticle, and we have minutes of angle as the system of measurement on our knobs. And that's not a desirable feature, so that did remove a couple points there. So our overall feature score was a C. So that's not bad. That'll work. The features on the Barska Tactical Rifle Scope are fine. They're not like super good, but a C is not a bad grade. Now, if we look at the potential long-range optical sights compared for quality, we're going to find some problems. Okay, we do have the big target knobs on the scope, but the tracking on these Barskas, and this is with most of these budget optics that are built for sporting purposes, they're not going to be offering the reliability of tracking that we're going to need. Now, it's true you might be able to kind of dial it in and it'll pretty much go where you want it to, but pretty much is not going to cut it at extreme range. So this one failed the test. The Barska is not going to give you the degree of turret tracking reliability that we are going to find to be essential for long-range target interdiction. So that got an F in that quality. So that basically rules this one out automatically right there. You can pretty much cross the Barska off the list just from that one. But just to go on, the internal build quality is quite poor on the Barskas. I do like them for other applications. They might be fine for a lot of sporting applications, or even, if you don't plan on dialing back and forth a lot. But for our applications, like I said before, we're shooting long range. So when we're talking about the alignment of the different lenses and the tolerances in the erector tube assembly and how everything slides back and forth in the variable optics, it has to be very precisely put together at extreme ranges, because a tiny amount of play in there is going to give you a huge point of impact shift. So if it's not really, really well put together, it's going to fail. So that's why it got an F. I'm not saying it's getting an F for other applications. This might work just fine for medium range shooting where you're not adjusting your turrets, or where slight changes in magnification are not going to affect your point of impact by enough to miss. But for long range applications, it was a failure. Optical clarity is actually not too bad in the Barska. It passes the test there. That it ain't bad. Now, there's a lot that are way better, obviously, but really, like we talked about before, and we'll talk about this when we talk about glass, and actually this is a good place to talk about glass, and we'll come back to this. Most of the rifle scopes you've probably grown up with use what is called achromatic glass. Now, we're going to talk about 3 different types of lenses here, okay? And we're going to talk about chromatic glass, Achromatic glass, and Apochromatic glass. And most modern rifle optics use achromatic glass. Let's look at the first chart here. If you just look at a chromatic lens, where you have just one piece of glass for a lens, this would be a standard lens. This is pretty much not used anymore. Most modern scopes use a better kind of lens. But you'll notice that when light strikes a lens at a straight angle, it is refracted inside the lens. When light goes from the air, the atmosphere, and it goes into something with a lot higher density, plastic or the glass. A lot of it's not really true glass. Some of it's plastic, especially in the cheaper lenses. But that's going to have a different refractive index than the air, so the light's going to change directions once it hits that. And you know that glass bends when it hits light, right? Like a prism, it bends the light, and it's going to separate your different colors out. And you're going to have three different main wavelengths going on. You're going to have your reds, which is a real low frequency, and they're kind of a long wavelength on there. And you're going to have your greens, which is a little bit shorter of a wavelength, a little higher frequency, and then your blues. And your blues are going to have a real high frequency and a short wavelength. It's going to be real, high energy wave. And depending on the type of glass, what exact recipe of chemistry is used in that glass, and the shape of the lens, that's all going to determine how those different, if you just shoot white light into a lens, it's going to determine how those colors split up, okay? And what you'll find in just a standard chromatic lens is you have chromatic aberration. And basically what that means, if you look at my little pictures I drew here on paint the other day again, see, I'm becoming quite the paint artist, as you can see. But you'll notice, and this is called chromatic aberration, the different colors are going to be separated, and they're not going to come to the same exact focal point. And the result is you're going to have an image that looks kind of goofy and blurry, depending on which part you're focused on with your eyeball, wherever that focal point is going to be. So your different colors are going to separate out. It's more than just, someone says, who cares what color the target is? Well, that's not really the deal, because you're going to have kind of a blurred effect if you have the reds focusing in on one point, and you're going to have a different focal point for the blues and the greens. It's going to appear kind of fuzzy in some ways. And so what most modern optics manufacturers have figured out a long time ago is that if you arrange a couple of different lenses, a flint lens and a crown lens, in a certain fashion like we show here illustrated, that you can actually bring the two different wavelengths, usually like red and blue, and you can at least get those two to focus in the same plane. And that basically limits the effects of the chromatic and spherical aberrations, the way these lenses are arranged. So odds are, if you've got a modern rifle scope made in the last 25 years or whatever, and you pick it up, the objective lens and your lenses are going to be achromatic lenses, which are corrected to bring the red and blues into focus in the same plane. Now, the green's going to be off by itself over there still. It's not going to be brought into focus in the same focal plane here. So it's still going to have a little bit of goofy, what we call chromatic aberration, which is basically, it's not going to be a perfectly clear image. But it's a lot better than it used to be. Now, if you're really wanting the very best in quality, and you have a lot of money in your pocket, you might get one of these real premium scopes that's going to offer what they call HD glass, or ED. And we're talking about the fluoride or APO glasses, high-density glasses. Now, HD, although some manufacturers have just decided to advertise HD as high-definition glass, the real term there is high-density glass. And what we have here, and this is an apochromatic lens setup. We actually have 3 different pieces of glass here, and all your different colors are going to be brought into the same focus points. Now, your blues, your reds, and your greens are all coming into focus in the same plane. And they're bringing the 3 separate wavelengths into focus. And this is where you get really, really sharp images with perfect color correction. And like again, we're not talking about just color, but this has to do with optical clarity, okay? You might have color fringing at a high contrast edges, like in edges between black and white, and it might get kind of goofy, fuzziness in there. There's different optical terms that guys will use in the business to kind of explain that effect. But basically, this is going to give you that super crisp image. But typically speaking, if you have any given scope model and you were going to somehow upgrade it to this HD glass, the high-density type glasses, or the apochromatic setup, you're going to pay a couple $100, maybe even $500 or $600 or $700 more than the model would have been just to have these lenses. They're extremely difficult to manufacture. There's a lot of fancy chemistry going into these. For example, some of these high-end flint glass pieces are going to have like titanium dioxide or zirconium dioxide, and there's a lot of engineering that goes into optics and getting that light to bend where you want it to bend. It's quite the complex field in physics. There's optics. So there's a lot of work and time and sweat and blood and tears that went into figuring all this stuff out for these guys. So when you pay the big money on the big fancy scopes with the real good glass, that's what we're talking about. Apochromatic. You got all your color correction being done there. So depending on which refractive index they want to give to these different glasses, they're going to introduce different chemicals and things like that into the compounds and get the composition to change so that the dispersion of the light is different. And so if you see like the term ED glass, if you see that advertised, that's talking about these apochromatically corrected lenses. And or APO, that just apochromatic is what that means. Some guys call this like a fluoride glass because fluoride is just it's a class of non-oxide optical glasses basically, and they use fluorides of different kinds of metals to get like a heavy metal fluoride glass. HMFG is another term you might hear, but it makes for real good optics, particularly of these higher quality lenses. So if you look at some of your real premium optics, they're going to be your APO lenses, your apochromatically corrected lenses. And those are going to be the most desirable ones in terms of optical clarity. So where do these different lenses come from? What's the origin of them?
$890. Confirm.
Green light.
It's a hit. 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 Nailed it. Yep.
Okay, 1.13 kilometers.
Oh, you got it!
Oh.
Holy cow, you got it!
Indexing 20.36. 20 we're going 20.4. Oh, yeah. Good call.